Luffy has the most ridiculous devil fruit, a mythical zone with the properties of rubber that allows him to bring his imagination to life, a power so strong that it decimated the world's strongest creature in one final punch. And the scary thing is, Luffy has not even scratched the surface of what's possible. So today we're going to be discussing how Luffy masters Gear 5th, what is he currently capable of, and how he can reach the full potential of his awakening. But before we get to that, make sure you subscribe and join the King Pirates crew so you don't miss any future videos. With that being said though, let's start off with a quick evaluation of Luffy's current powers, which honestly I've done a couple times on this channel. But still, it's one of the more interesting topics for me to talk about because the current Luffy and how strong he really is kind of hard to measure. After awakening his devil fruit, he was clearly much stronger, but it did feel like he was a little out of control and running on an adrenaline rush. And partially that was because he was just having the time of his life, going to war with Kaido, facing this challenge that brought him near death several times. But also after he awakened, it really felt like he just broke the seal off of his devil fruit abilities. Because up until he awakened his devil fruit, even though he did not know the true nature of it, he still always used the fruit in its best way, by using his imagination. 17-year-old East Blue Luffy was still using attacks no one else could ever think of. And of course this continues as he explores the world, meets new races, stronger people, and tougher challenges. And from those experiences he gets inspiration from giants, Cypher Pole agents, and even his own brother. So from the moment Luffy got his devil fruit, he had always used it in the best way possible, but he just couldn't maximize it. The strongest power he created was Gear 4th, which honestly looking back at it, it really felt like he just pushed the limits of the devil fruit before it awakened. Because as we saw after he awakened, one major benefit that he gained was that his stretchiness really had no limits anymore. He could just expand himself to an unbelievable amount, straight up turning himself into a giant, or just concentrate everything into his fist and create just one giant island-sized fist. Before awakening, that was not something he could do. As a matter of fact, a lot of the growth that we saw from Luffy was really him controlling and pushing the limits of how much he can stretch. Even when he first used Gear 2nd, initially it was literally taking away his lifespan, and that was because he was stretching parts of his body that he had never done before. The same thing happened with Gear 3rd, with him inflating his bones and just stretching himself to the max, which resulted in an after effect of him turning into a midget. Of course, eventually after a lot of training and the time skip, he was able to get those under control, but with Gear 4th, he could never overcome the drawbacks. Even in the final fight against Kaido, he was still having stamina issues. And that's why I think Gear 4th was the peak of what he can do before he awakened. It was a form where he stretched, coiled, and condensed his body to the max and combined it with Haki. He just could not go any further. That is of course until he awakened, and now the possibilities are endless. Ironically though, we actually didn't really get to see him maximize the powers of Gear 4th after awakening, and that's something we'll discuss next and how he can reach his full potential. But instead what we saw from Gear 5th was more of a showcase of everything about it. Aesthetically, he turns into what I assume is Nika's appearance, a white-haired god that has white clouds surrounding him. Along with that, you also have the drums of liberation beating from his heart, which transforms him into this form. Beyond that, he also showcased the possibilities of what he can do in this form. We already mentioned the stretchiness and how much bigger he can expand now. He did also show some signs of powers he used with Gear 4th, like the Bajran gun is a coiled fist, similar to a King Kong gun. We also saw him inflate his muscles as well, like he does in Gear 4th. And on top of that, another major benefit of his awakening is his ability to affect other things, from people to the environment. And this part is actually kind of underrated because it really shows how strong the fruit is, because affecting other things like the environment is a paramecia awakening power. So Luffy's getting like a 2-for-1 here, which means the rubber world theory that's been in the community for a long time comes true. Of course, that in itself has its own benefits, and Luffy used it a little bit but didn't really show too much. What's more interesting and confusing though is how Luffy is able to use his powers to affect other people, because with awakening he's able to apply his rubber properties to other people, which actually isn't that surprising considering just a few moments earlier we saw Eustace Kid do that to Big Mom. With his awakening, he was able to apply his magnetic powers to Big Mom, using her to attract and repel, and Luffy's now able to do that as well with rubber, which created crazy moments like him punching through Kaido's Kaido's head and putting his arms through Kaido's eyes. And this part to me is the craziest and most confusing part of Luffy's power, because physically it looks absolutely wild to see him just straight up punch through Kaido's head. But at the same time, the effects of this power is kinda unknown because it doesn't have the same impact as it looks. Kaido isn't dead after Luffy punches through his head, and he doesn't turn blind after he goes through his eyes. So out of all of Luffy's powers in Gear 5th, this is by far the hardest one to gauge how strong it actually is. So this is one topic I'm gonna pass on to you guys. How do you think Luffy's gonna really maximize this power? Moving on from that though, we also saw some other abilities from Luffy, like him finally using lightning. Once again, this is not really too surprising because we already knew he was immune to lightning. This is him just being more creative with it. But finally, the last power of Gear 5th we have to mention is the one I think is the most impressive, even more impressive than the island-sized fist that he created to take down Kaido. And that power is Luffy's durability, which is absolutely insane. And this is something I talked about before in a chapter review. After Luffy awakened, the amount of damage that he just straight up tanked is insane. He's been bitten twice by Kaido, burrow blasted twice, he's taken a Ragnarok club, he's had 4 unnamed Conqueror's Haki clubs right in his face, another Death Destroyer Thunder Bagua, and he got sliced up by Demolition Breath. And he took all of that damage alone after awakening. Considering the fact that he almost died multiple times before that, his durability is crazy. And to an extent, this should be expected because he is a Zoan, and the whole point of Zone Awakenings is so that their durability and recovery becomes much stronger. But that doesn't mean it wasn't impressive, because he also tanked most of those hits without really defending himself. The only thing he did have was the benefit of extra stretchiness, which allowed him to tank some clubs by stretching around it. But it is important to note that he is still rubber, so he's still not immune to cutting attacks. And speaking of weaknesses, his number one downfall is still his stamina. And overall, I think that's the main issue with Luffy's current level, which is that he still has a lot to learn. Like honestly, at this point, I don't even know if he knows that he has a Zone Devil Fruit. He could have just awakened and been like, oh wow, I have new powers now, that's pretty dope. So in order for him to reach the next level in his final gear, he simply has to get a better understanding of his powers and master it, and the possibilities are endless. And that gets us to the topic of the full potential of Gear 5th. And I think a good way to start this discussion is simply looking at his previous gears and how he can maximize them. For example, Gear 2nd is him speeding up his blood flow to increase his power and speed, which is something he did not utilize in Gear 5th. Considering how much more he can stretch and how much more durable he is, the use of Gear 2nd in Gear 5th is kinda underrated, because if he can maximize his body to another level by really speeding up his blood flow, just that alone, his power and speed is gonna be incredible. And like, this is something that's not really like a sexy power up where we see some like drastic aesthetic changes, but if he's able to just understand his powers a little more and maximize his body, it adds a lot to his base form with just that alone. Gear 3rd, on the other hand, is where we can get a little crazy, because we already saw all the insane creations he can make now that he can stretch so much more. But at the same time, it is important to know that while giant form was really cool, it did not work. Luffy just straight up got bitten after that. So honestly, that moment more so felt like Luffy realizing how much bigger he can stretch, but not really knowing how to use it. But of course, now that he knows how to do that, I'm sure he's gonna use it to his full potential. When we go to Elbaf, we're definitely gonna see that giant form. And what makes the giant form even more interesting is the potential of how it can be used even outside of fighting. I'm sure there's gonna be funny moments where big things have to be moved and Luffy just goes into giant form and just uses it that way. But as far as fighting goes, I think the real potential of gigantification is when Luffy actually combines it with Haki. First off, with his level of Haki alone, just armament Haki in giant form is already deadly. But once you start combining advanced armament Haki and advanced Conqueror's Haki, it's gonna be game over for a lot of people. Because Luffy now can get himself to the size of an actual giant, which is bigger than Big Mom and Kaido, while still having that same level of a monstrous Haki. Now, of course, he doesn't always have to be in full giant form, because we also saw the potential size he can create when he just focuses on one thing with Bajran Gun. And honestly, I think he could go even bigger, because Bajran Gun was really an iteration of King Kong Gun. That fist was coiled. If Luffy just wanted to focus on size and creating a fist that's as big as possible, I honestly think that it's not impossible for him to create something that's the size of a real island. I know that it might seem like a crazy idea, but you gotta remember, we're in the final saga. There's gonna be things involved like Zunisha and Sea Kings and ancient weapons. Obviously, I don't expect Luffy to be as strong as ancient weapons, but I also don't think he's gonna be completely outmatched. So I think with Gear 5th, his ability to expand is gonna be his way of rivaling ancient weapons. Like, just imagine a Gear 5th version of Elephant Gun and Elephant Gatling, and just how much destruction that can cause. Like, we're not even talking about in terms of power, because Bajran Gun can probably deal more damage. But if Luffy really wanted to destroy something, say like Fishman Island, I think him unloading an elephant gun with island-sized fists will do that. But yeah, as far as Gear 3rd goes, I think there's a lot of potential in how Luffy can maximize it and use it even outside of fights. But that gets us to Gear 4th, and this is where the potential of power and damage comes in because we saw it firsthand. Bajran Gun was essentially the Gear 5th version of King Kong Gun, and it decimated Kaido. Now imagine what happens if Luffy's able to maximize that power and use it across his whole body. Because Gear 4th is not just focused on one single part of his body, it's his entire body that's maximized for power, speed, and defense. Now of course, if he does spread this power throughout his body, it's not going to be as big. It did look like he took some time to really expand and build up Bajran Gun, but even if he's able to create smaller, more compact attacks that's still way bigger than Gear 4th, those are going to be deadly. Like imagine him creating a smaller Bajran Gun but now using it as a Gatling. That will mess people up. And of course, damage is not the only special thing about Gear 4th. There's also the fact that he can defend himself. In Bound Man, he found this perfect combination of stretchiness and haki, which allowed him to really absorb attacks and tank them. With Gear 5th, I'm sure that only gets stronger when he uses it, combined with his already crazy durability. I don't know how you take Luffy out at that point. And then we also have to consider Snake Man, a form that specialized in speed and stretchiness, where Luffy had multiple attacks that were rapid homing attacks that had incredible unpredictability. Even in just Gear 4 Snake Man, he defeated Katakuri with it and even hurt Kaido. He didn't really even use those attacks at all in Gear 5th, so that's another stronger attack that might be so fast that people can't even see it. And even if they could see it with observation haki, Luffy is also great at observation haki. So the potential of Snake Man attacks with Awakening, that's something Luffy has to draw out. There's also Tank Man, but I'm feeling like that's more of a situational thing that Luffy's not going to use anymore. What's more exciting though is the different combinations Luffy can use. We usually only see it with Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd, but now that Luffy is awakened and really has no limits, I can see him just switching between all of these forms and creating some deadly combinations. So as far as the gears go, there's still a lot that Luffy has not touched or utilized in Gear 5th. Besides that though, there's also Luffy utilizing his environment, and this one's pretty straightforward, is him just using his creativity. But with him being able to affect the environment, he can really use it to create momentum, accelerate, deflect, absorb, essentially create a bounce house. It essentially allows him to just completely dominate the playing field unless you have other people that can also affect the environment, which honestly just makes it more fun and makes me excited for a fight against Blackbeard. So how Luffy uses the environment has a lot of potential, especially considering he can also use lightning now. Once again, that attack was really another showcase. He still failed in hitting Kaido. Of course, eventually I expect him to succeed. I am interested whether or not he can like really use it to combine it with physical attacks. And speaking of elemental attacks, we still have not seen a Gear 5th version of Red Rock. So once again, that's another additional power that makes him stronger. I think there's higher levels of haki that Luffy can reach as well. So even though we're in the final saga and there's not many fights left, Luffy still has some growing to do. That's gonna do it for this video. If you made it this far, you probably had a good time, so please drop a like for the YouTube algorithm. And behind me, I'm holding up a number between 1 to 2. If you guess it wrong, you have to like, subscribe, and watch the next video. And the answer is 2.